Hello and welcome to the Nourishing Insights podcast. And today on our podcast we have Giles Watkins, who will be sharing his fascinating research on the topic of sleep, why we need it, why it's becoming more elusive in our modern world, and the wider implications of just not getting enough sleep and what we can do about it. He'll also be talking about the implications for productivity and how it impacts our working lives. But before we go into that, let's just give a little bio for Giles. Giles Watkins is Director of Tinderbox Management Consultancy and has over 30 years of global business and general management experience with Shell, McKinsey and Vistage. He's recently been featured in Psychreg Journal, Employer News and Elite Business Magazine, among others, to promote his book, Positive Sleep, a holistic approach to resolve sleep issues and transform your life. Giles Watkins is also an opinion columnist for the CEOWORLD Magazine. So thank you so much, Giles, and welcome to you, and thank you for joining us today and going through this fabulous topic. It's something that I always talk about in my work. It's very much, as nutritional therapists, something that we include as one of our pillars when we're making any kind of holistic assessment with people. But I'm delighted to have read your book and enjoyed the fact that you're very, very open and honest about your own personal journey, and then have gone on to develop that. But I think a question on everyone's minds just now is the fact that, you know, having listened to your bio, how on earth does a CEO become so fascinated with the topic of sleep and then end up writing a book on that topic? So would you like to tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, yes, Beverley, thanks. And thanks very much for inviting me to join you on the podcast. I had a classic corporate career, and I worked for one company. It happened to be Shell for 21 years, and then worked with others after that, and rose through the ranks to become CEO of different parts of both Shell and then a couple of other organizations I worked for. And during that journey, I guess I did what most people do, which I increasingly sacrificed not just sleep, but probably a healthy diet and exercise and so forth, and let work become more dominant in my life and to the detriment of other things. And I guess that was really part of the journey that I went on to get myself into a pretty bad state when it came to sleep, and then had a moment where I realized I needed to do something about it. So I was not an unusual sleeper as a kid. I don't think anything like that. The only thing that was unusual maybe was my parents enjoyed a nap of the afternoon if they were around. My mum was at home mostly, and my dad the weekend. So at least I understood the value of a nap, and I think that was quite useful to me when I had sleep issues, and I still find it. We'll probably talk about naps later, but I still find naps useful. And it wasn't until, I guess, my 30s that I really understood that I had a sleep issue. I think I was gradually cutting corners around sleep, probably from my 20s and teens, late teens and 20s. I pulled a few all-nighters to write essays as a student. I'm sure many of us will be familiar with that. Mm-hmm. And just gradually probably got into poor habits around diet and exercise, particularly caffeine use and so forth, that was affecting my sleep. And then, I did have a sort of a trigger moment that made it worse. And I also had a moment then about a decade later when I suddenly thought, I really need to do something about this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yes, and I think a lot of people will have had a similar journey, and I remember pulling the odd all-nighter as a student as well. But other than that, fortunately for me, I have difficulties with sleep, and I really need to prioritise it, because if I don't get proper sleep, I can end up with migraine, which has started to happen in more recent years. So for me, I have to do it, which is quite a good thing. But having had that experience, that's one thing. But I suppose having had that and recognised that you have a sleep problem yourself, I guess then when an opportunity presented itself to come up with a thesis for a master's program, and that was with a business school in Singapore, was sleep then the obvious topic for you to try and explore further as part of that?
it became the obvious topic, but it wasn't the obvious topic initially. Yes, I was fortunate enough, in parallel with being a CEO, to also do an executive master's in coaching and consulting for change at INSEAD in Singapore, as you mentioned. And part of that program, which is a program that sort of starts with looking at you looking at yourself introspectively and gradually moving out into your organization, your family, the world, etc. Fantastic program, is that everyone had to write a thesis because it was a master's program. And I remember my supervisor saying, well, what you'll do is I just want you to write down all the topics you think you might want to write a thesis on, which all got to be to do with change, whether it be you wanting to change something personally or organizational change or change in the world or change in your family or something like that. And typically we'll end up choosing the middle topic on the list. And I wrote 20 topics down, and the 10th topic was sleep.
Wow.
So she was right. And we started talking about it as a possibility. And then a couple of professors on the course heard that I was going to do it. And one of them sent me a link to a TED Talk by a guy called Jeff Iliff, which I still recommend to people, about the emerging link between sleep issues and Alzheimer's.
Absolutely.
And as soon as I saw that talk, I thought, that's not going to be me in 40 years' time. I can't say I'm not going to get Alzheimer's, but if by sleeping better I can reduce my chances of it, then I'm going to sleep better. So that was the moment when I said, I'm going to do something about it.
Gosh, that's amazing. Such a fascinating story, and that it happened that way with you, writing out 20 ideas and going for the middle one. That's quite amazing. But I think it's interesting with Alzheimer's that you mentioned that, because obviously when we think about our brain health, our brains rest while we sleep. So is it a wonder then that there's going to be that link physiologically there with damage over the years? I think that's something that seems obvious, and yet it's something that we forget. And there's certainly a reason why we've got increasing rates of these kinds of conditions.
Yeah.
Is that to do with how we just take care of ourselves or don't take care of ourselves, and in terms of doing the obvious things, and that is becoming a worsening issue in society now. So,
Yes, I think that sleep science is relatively new. Most significant medical research around sleep started about 100 years ago. You can see other comments by sort of ancient thinkers around sleep from sort of thousands of years ago, but really the actual research was about 100 years ago, and most of that activity has been centered in the last 70 or 80 years, which is very new. So before that, people, I think, just regarded sleep as the thing you did when you weren't doing everything else. It was the sort of the other 8 hours or whatever it was of your day. And that, of course, means that it's a relatively new area of research, which is one of the reasons why we're only recently discovering how important it is and what's really going on. And we still, from all the stuff I've read, and I've obviously in the last 6-7 years, I've read a lot of different research papers and books around sleep. We're still not absolutely sure what's going on, just as we're not absolutely sure what's going on with your dreams and things like that. It's not a precise destination yet, if you like, in terms of knowing.
Yeah.
But we have a reasonably good grasp on quite a lot of things. And as you say, the emerging link between Alzheimer's and poor sleep is something that's been quite well documented now for about the last decade.
Yes, absolutely. So for many of us, sleep problems as such can sneak up without us knowing, and there seems to be, for many, and I find this with clients as well, that trigger point, which can be due to a build-up of stress, perhaps in the workplace, perhaps recently gone through a bereavement or death, divorce, etc. All of these things can catch up with us, and we start off with a few changes in the sleep, but then that translates into something much, much deeper. And obviously that, it sounds from the book, that's what's happened to yourself. And so I just thought it'd be nice if you could take us through some of the things, or what was that turning point for you, do you feel, looking back over your life, where something, was...
Yeah, there was a very clear trigger for me, yeah, as you say, Beverley. I was newly engaged to be married in 2001. And In fact, it was 2002. Sorry, I was newly engaged to be married, and my boss briefed us one day on how there was a massive organizational change that was going to go on in Shell, and that it was going to mean we'd all have to reapply for our jobs, and that some of those people, some of us probably wouldn't get a chance to get another role in Shell and so forth. And although I was used to large reorganizations and having to reapply for my job, I wasn't used to that in the context of now being engaged to be married. My then fiance is French, or was French, and so she came from a different background around this sort of thing, and I think she thought I was being sacked. The whole idea of sort of reorganization and reapplying for your job was something that was alien to her, and she found it very stressful. And I just remember from the day that announcement was made and all that went around that meeting, my sleep started to deteriorate. And it was, if I look back on it, it was very, the odd minute or 2 or 5 minutes here and there to start with, but gradually over the coming years, it got worse and worse. So there was definitely a trigger event, and then life happens. My mother died, changed country, became a dad, all sorts of things, all those sorts of things, and changed country a few more times, changed job a few more times, and what people often do in the corporate world, and worked overseas quite a bit. So all the sorts of things that can happen to you happen, and they are just compounding an issue and a new sort of habit, if you like, that you've developed, which is you're sleeping less and less and less all the time until it becomes, it's affected every part of your life, and you're really not functioning properly as a human being in any department, whether it be as a dad or a partner or a boss or a leader or whatever. As a result, that's what happened to me.
Yeah, excellent. And I love the fact that you're so open in the book about the wider implications of not getting sleep, not just for your own physical health, but emotional health, and the implications for your relationships with others, be they family or your working relationships as well. And I think that a lot of people will identify with that and will really appreciate that openness coming through. But like many people, I suppose the first step when you do find that something's becoming a bit of a problem is that you maybe visit your family doctor to see if they've got any words of wisdom around that. And largely you were a bit disappointed in what happened, although there were things later on that you did identify as a particular problem for you, and did find some things useful. So would you like to take us through some of the things you did find helpful and some of the things you didn't?
Yeah, I'd worked overseas, as I said, quite a lot. And so some of the places I worked, like Indonesia and Sri Lanka, for example, there were not people that you might go to easily to discuss sleep issues. It wasn't really something that was on the agenda there. And if you started talking to a doctor about it, they'd sort of look blank at you or start telling you about their sleep issues. So it wasn't really until I moved back to live in the UK in 2014 that I thought, no, I've got an opportunity to address this properly. So I remember going to my local GP, and firstly, I told him what my sleep issues were and how I was waking up at 3 a.m. and only getting about 5 or 6 hours sleep, and the sort of patterns I was adopting. And to which his response was, well, you're doing quite well with your sleep, and told me how he was getting less. And then the obvious things to prescribe were pills and a trip to see a sleep specialist. Now, I remember leaving the surgery and just ripping up the prescription for the pills and putting it straight in the bin, because I just intuitively felt that was not the way I wanted to go. And all that I've read ever since suggests that I was right in that, that sleeping pills are only actually going to make it worse afterwards. As soon as you come off them, you'll probably be further back than you were before you took them, and the sleep that you get while you're taking them is not very good quality sleep, so that they really don't serve any sort of purpose at all. And the other thing that was recommended when I later on went for a quite expensive sleep test in Harley Street, actually, which my doctor had assured me I could get paid for with my health insurance, and I found out I couldn't. So I spent £1,500 to understand my problem better, rather than finding a solution.
Mhm.
The other thing that was recommended at the time was cognitive behavioral therapy, which I'm not against. I'm sure it is very valuable for many different people, but I just felt that that was going to tell me all the other things that were wrong in my life that might be causing a sleep problem, most of which I knew were not going right, and I didn't necessarily think that going through that course was going to help me. So what really helped me, a couple of things that really made a shift for me were, one was around using this device called the CRAP device, which is a way of actually helping you with your sleep apnea, which I suffered from, which is this micro interruptions in your sleep that occur. And that breathing device was incredibly useful to me. And I think the other was then starting to look at the whole area of diet and exercise, and actually taking a more holistic approach, which was prompted by starting to read about sleep, really. And the sort of some of the books I reference in my own book, like Dr. Guy Meadows and obviously Matthew Walker and Arianna Huffington, and some of these authors that have now written quite a lot, reading their stuff and picking up some practical tips as well as you say, just re-emphasizing that decision I'd made when I realized the Alzheimer's link, that
Yes,
I needed to crack this.
absolutely. And I really enjoy the fact that in the book as well, you talk about some of those wider implications, because a lot of people have no idea that sleep is linked to so many things, from weight management issues to their mental health, to fertility, hormone regulation, immune health. The list, in fact, is endless. And we really do need to prioritize sleep in our lives. But you did mention in the book some interesting statistics around sleep, and the fact that we are sleeping much less now than, for example, in the 1950s. And you also talk about how sleep deprivation affects our responses. So would you like to take us through some of your findings on these topics?
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing to state is that there's been research done in the UK and some other markets as well, especially the US, but particularly in the UK, that shows we sleep between 1 and 2 hours less than we did in the 1950s. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think we've evolved so radically in the last 50, 60 years that we don't need to sleep the same as we did maybe in the 50s. So the most likely explanation to me for that is the pressures that have grown in terms of opportunities, really, for using the internet, for watching TV, for all the other things that you can do instead of sleep, if you like, and smartphones and handheld devices and all these other things that have emerged in the last, even more recently than that, have given an opportunity to people to say, I'll sleep when I'm dead, which became a bit of a phrase that was used not so long ago quite widely. And most people just don't have any idea what harm they're doing to themselves while they're doing that, while they're taking that approach. In terms of how that then affects you and your performance, if you like, the context I normally look at, obviously, is a leadership context, because I was a leader of a business and still obviously run my own business now, but was leader of several larger organizations. And for me, some of the work, particularly that came out of the work in McKinsey on this, is really compelling, where you actually, they surveyed several hundred leaders in terms of their attitude towards sleep, their performance, and the organizational culture around it as well. And they found that, for example, if you're short of sleep, you're much less likely to be focused on your results of your business, because you can't really stay as focused as you might be on both the big picture and the little stuff. And in fact, if you're sleep deprived and you're only sleeping 3 or 4 hours a night, it's equivalent to actually being drunk at work in terms of your responses. Now, you wouldn't go to work drunk if you're a leader of a business. That would be, everyone would say that was irresponsible, just you wouldn't drive drunk. Well, effectively that's what quite a lot of people are doing, because not only of short sleeping on a particular night, but then the cumulative effect of short sleeping. Another aspect that was highlighted really well was the ability to solve problems effectively. You just don't have the same ability to do so. But fortunately, the good news is the converse works. So if you have a nap in the afternoon, if you're feeling a bit tired, and take a half-hour nap, and then you go back to what it was you were doing before, which you have struggling with, 9 times out of 10, you'll be able to crack it, because you're just much sharper. And there's loads of research that's been done to show that. Another thing that I remember very vividly myself as a leader was my inability when I was tired to just seek other perspectives on things. So one of the key things as a CEO running a business is not to be blinkered and to use the resources of your, particularly the C-suite, the people around you, to help crack problems and work out the best way forward. And I remember vividly, I had a guy when I was working in Sri Lanka who'd always come in after the management meeting and start telling me that actually just had an idea or just thought about something extra. And I was always dismissive of him. I'd say, go away. It's 5 to 5. We've had a full day management meeting. I don't really want to hear about this. And I'll probably be a little bit more polite than that, Beverley, actually. But my objective was to get him out of the office and not really act on what he was saying. But of course, he was actually a good thinker. He was just one of those reflective thinkers that often thinks of things after the meeting. And that's when he comes. And often, looking back on it, he had some great insights. But I was too tired to be able to cope with them, and I just didn't want to know. And I think that also then manifests itself in another key point around supporting others. When you're in a leadership role, or any sort of, just sort of being a good colleague, your awareness of what your peers are going through is quite important, particularly visual cues and things like this. And again, studies show that if you're poorly rested, if you haven't had enough sleep, you just won't pick up the non-verbal cues in the same way. So you might hear what someone's saying, but you're not actually hearing how they're saying it. And as most of us know, it's the non-verbal that is so vital in actually understanding communication. So that's just a few examples of the kinds of things that I guess I was suffering from. If I look back on it, I think I was generally regarded the organisation I worked in as a reasonably effective CEO, but I look back and think, gosh, I could have been so much more effective and had a better life if I'd just been prioritising my sleep.
Absolutely. And actually, that image of someone coming in at 5 o'clock and coming in with a great idea, it also then continues in our home life, because a lot of people then go home and just as they're too tired to listen to that manager who had a great idea, they're also too tired to maybe listen to their children who are coming in with their news from school, what they've been up to, and they're kind of listening but not listening and not properly engaging in family life, which affects the quality of life for everyone involved.
Yeah, no, that was certainly the case with me.
So I was also glad that you included a chapter on obesity, as again, many people would not make that link between sleep and obesity, but that to me would be a big motivator for a lot of people. To use sleep as part of their weight management strategy. And actually you do mention as well that the lack of sleep, there's increased risk of type 2 diabetes with that, among other health challenges, and that's something I see in my clinical practice all the time. And of course, one of the reasons physiologically why that happens is that when we don't sleep, we have an increase in a couple of hormones, and the hormone ghrelin is involved in hunger, and we get an increase in that, which is not helpful. And then we get a decrease in the hormone leptin, which promotes satiety or that feeling of fullness. So we can quickly see how those mechanisms would be at play here if we don't get our proper sleep. But when I was reading that chapter, it put me in mind of a client of mine who had type 2 diabetes and who did really well, changing his diet and improved a lot of things symptomatically. But he hit a bit of a brick wall in terms of how much weight he could lose. But I knew he wasn't sleeping, and we tried different things to support that. But in this particular case, it was quite interesting because he actually had a phobia around sleep, and he'd had this for a long time. And in a situation like that, sometimes we do need to go on for further help and further support to address that. So in all cases, it's trying to find the full story. And, you know, you mentioned earlier about going to the doctor and it's not that helpful just getting a pill, getting a sleeping pill or whatever. And I think most GPs now would be on the page with that one and say, and I know for my clients, they're often told, well, you can take this with you, but, you know, try not to use it unless you're absolutely desperate. Try and do some other things first. But it's the same with us. We have supplements that will help people, and they certainly do help. And we'll talk a little bit about those towards the end, but they're not the full answer, because there are always those individual things that are going on, and that could be to do with our behaviours, it could be to do with caffeine, alcohol, and also it might be something very individual to them. And this was a really interesting case because it was a very specific phobia that we had to uncover and needed further support. You know, when I refer on to psychotherapy, etc., when these things show themselves, but it just is another example of the fact that we really need to bring in all of those variables and kick over every stone when we're working with clients to properly get a result, when we're trying to manage sleep issues holistically. But yeah, did you want to say a little bit more about your own experience with that? Because I know you did comment in the book on, for example, the fact that you noticed those shifts in how you felt hormonally, because you weren't having quite the food cravings that you would have been having prior to some of the changes that you made.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that helped me actually both around sleep and probably around losing a bit of weight and having a bit more energy was, I worked with, I think I mentioned her in the book, I worked with Kim Rain, who was basically a wellness and diet and exercise person that I'd been recommended to talk to. And she, I guess, challenged me, and she said, why don't you give up coffee for a month? Because I think that will help with your digestion of things. It will help with your sleep. It will help with a lot of things. And I was a 7 espressos a day person. Okay. So I really was on that path, and that had come about and really started not long after I started having really bad sleep problems, unsurprisingly. And I was able, because I was working overseas, I had my own office, I ended up having an espresso machine by my desk and one at home as well. So unsurprisingly, I was enjoying that facility, and I'd have literally 6 or 7 espressos by about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I had learned that having coffee later in the day was bad for me, but that just seemed to mean that I had more of them squashed into a shorter period. And she challenged me to give up coffee for a month and see what effect I would feel. And I had some of the worst headaches you can imagine for a period of time, several days, in fact. The sort of headaches that almost would encourage you to actually not give up coffee, but start drinking it again and just think it was so bad. So I went through a real cold turkey experience for about 5 or 6 days. So I think if anyone is thinking of doing something similar, I always say to them, either try and do it over a holiday or a bank holiday, or sometime when you know you're going to have some downtime, and or take an alternative route, which is to cut down. If you're having 7 espressos a day, only have 6 for a couple of weeks, and then go to 5 and go to 4. Maybe do it in a more gradual way. But I went the cold turkey route and did that way. And after a month, I thought, well, actually, I went through so much pain to give coffee up, I'll give it another month. And that was 5 years ago or 6 years ago. I think 6 years ago now. And I haven't had 5 years ago, I haven't had a coffee since. So that was a key thing for me, the link to generally improve my diet and improve my ability to, on many fronts. And it was just an addiction that I had. And I'd love to have another cup of coffee now. I still have a coffee machine, and I still love it when people ask me to make one. I love the smell of coffee, but I don't trust myself, I guess, to be able to control it. The other thing that I did at the same time was really start to take more exercise, and that then had a very positive effect, especially on, I've got a son now who's 14, and at the time I think he was about 8. So, in terms of my ability to sort of play cricket with him and do sports with him and so forth. And I definitely find when I go through periods where I take less exercise, because I'm human, I still get to stages where I get too focused on running the business or other things, it affects my sleep. But when I've actually had proper exercise during the day, I sleep better. No question about it. If I've done an hour's exercise, like I played a game of tennis yesterday, and slept much better as a result. So I think those 2 things, probably giving up the coffee and the exercise helped. And coming back to your original question, especially helped with obesity, because I think caffeine that caffeine was stunting some of my digestion of things, as well as obviously the lack of exercise was meaning I was piling on the pounds. So it was certainly a big sell to me, Beverley. I'd never heard of the link. And it was one of those things that just reinforced the commitment I'd made to myself after finding the link with Alzheimer's, that said, this has got to be the way forward for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, I always take great pleasure in talking to clients about the link between sleep and weight, because they automatically think that the way to lose weight is to exercise more and eat less, and that's it. They certainly wouldn't realise that their weight had anything to do with their sleep. And if someone is chronically stressed, or someone with long-term chronic stress issues and adrenal fatigue, then the sleep issue becomes even more of an issue. And that's when we can start to develop that cortisol belly, as I call it, when these things start to take hold over the years, and they do sneak in and start to cause all kinds of problems metabolically. So that's quite a nice one, actually. I always love telling people, you don't need the gym, you need a good night's sleep is actually the answer. And it does. We have the proof of the pudding's in the eating, and people go in, work on these strategies, and they start to improve things. But I know that, you only have to walk your dog and you'll notice in someone's front window, not that I'm looking through people's front windows, but you can see that they've got, that they're basically lying on their couches, laptop on their knee, TV on the wall, and a phone in the other hand. That's 3 devices. That's a lot of exposure to devices that we have now routinely. And of course, that's impacting that blue light effect is affecting melatonin, is suppressing melatonin. So this has become another factor in our lifestyle that's becoming a bit of a nuisance. And that's perhaps another reason why things are worsening in recent years, because our exposure has gone up and up and up, but also the expectation to be on call 24/7 in our businesses.
Yeah, no doubt. And I certainly use the concept in my book of bookending your night, this idea of letting the day in and letting the day out. I think more and more people are becoming attuned to the fact that if they can switch off their devices an hour or so before they go to bed, and they can disconnect from work and disconnect from social media and so forth, that actually that's a good thing. That I'm not saying that everyone does that, but I think people are at least getting an awareness around that, linked also to the blue light challenges and so forth of those devices, as you say, which dampens melatonin, which is the very thing we need to help us go to sleep. What I also publicise as best I can, and I think there's more work that needs to be done on this, is helping people understand the idea of letting the day in the morning, and that when we wake up, as I understand it, we're still processing things from the night. And it's a bit like a percolator. Things are still percolating through our brain, and that's often why, if we then take some time out or go and have a shower or do some exercise and so forth, often people talk about the number of great ideas they get in the shower in the morning. Well, I think the reason for that is that they've been thinking about certain things overnight, and they've been sort of, as often happens with your brain overnight, your operating system is taking in some of the things that happened the previous day and sort of integrating it into the new operating system. So we now get a new release every night, if you like, of a new version of our brain taking what's happened in the previous day. And while that process is going on, and then when you wake up in the morning, you suddenly get solutions to questions you slept on, as it were. And I think that is another thing that increasingly, I think I certainly personally I'd like to publicize a lot, is the whole concept of letting the day in, allowing yourself to do something else before you leap onto to work. And in this post-COVID environment that we're going into, where people have got very used to working from home and maybe just starting working the emails in their pajamas, having just woken up at 6:30 or whatever it happens to be, there is research to support the fact that giving your brain the chance to just continue to process what's happened overnight and just sort that out first before you start loading new stuff in would be healthier.
So the bookending idea was a really, really nice one that I must say I enjoyed. I like that expression, actually, and I think it's really appropriate. and something that we all need, because there is that tendency, and I've been guilty of it the same as the next one, of as soon as you wake up, you think about something, oh gosh, I'll just check that email, I'll just check this, I'll just check that. And it's not a good thing to do. It's not a good way to start our days. And again, I do wonder how that effect is having on families and on relationships, because if, you know, your other half is seeing you and you're on your emails already before you've said good morning, that's not a healthy way to start your day. And nor is your children witnessing you constantly in front of a laptop. So, you know, there are all sorts of benefits from making these changes. And if we can motivate managers by thinking, well, actually, you might have some of your best ideas at this time in the morning when you are in the shower, and you're allowing those ideas, as you said, so well, you know, to percolate. I think that's a nice way of thinking about that, and allowing the day to start slowly, so that we can go on and be more effective in whatever it is that we do in life.
Yes, and I think if I look at some of the other things, I think, you know, when you're rested, you're generally at your best, or you're in a better place than obviously when you're not. I think for me, what did people notice? I think one thing they probably noticed, I was a bit more honest and authentic, and I would actually say what I thought rather than just nod and possibly not process properly what people were saying. And as you say, the whole concept of not just listening to what people say, but how they say it. If you're doing that, then you're much more likely to then properly be able to have a proper dialogue with people. And I certainly think that people noticed that. Another thing, of course, is I had more time for my son, as I think in terms of just energy and being able to play sport with him and so forth. And I've always been very motivated. I mean, I became a dad when I was 41, which I felt was, you know, reasonably old compared to most people. And I guess for me, a motivator has always been around, okay, how can I remain fit and healthy for Elliot, and the opportunity to play sport with him and so forth. Now, the fact that he can beat me at everything now, of course, he probably thinks that I can't play very well, but at least I can. At least I'm still able to get on the tennis court with him and bowl to him in cricket and all that sort of stuff. So you know, that's been a motivator to me. And I think one other thing, I mean, the last couple of years ago, I did a major cycle ride, 100k cycle ride for a charity that I was involved in, and I went off to Rwanda for 2 weeks to do some work with them. It's a cricket-based charity, and I would never have been able to do something like that when I couldn't sleep properly. I just wouldn't have had the energy, and I couldn't even have thought about the concept of dedicating the time to practice and cycle an hour a day or whatever to prepare for that, let alone be able to actually function in the heat of Rwanda and coach cricket for a couple of weeks. So there's lots of different things that came around for me, and I think just led me to be able to do the things I really wanted to do, as opposed to be just getting to that much more can-do positive mindset. Whereas before it was sort of, what I can do is I can be a reasonably good leader of a business, and then everything else I have to put to one side because I'm taking all my energy to just do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think for a lot of my clients, the big motivator is in being able to do more things to improve their quality of life, to be able to do more things with children and grandchildren, as you say. But I wonder, to what extent your colleagues began to notice changes in you, because obviously you were feeling all these shifts going on as you made these fairly dramatic changes in your life. But do you feel that, or did you notice, did others comment on the changes that they were seeing in you in a positive way?
I think people saw a change in me, as you say, but I think sometimes it wasn't maybe always positive. If I was being that much more authentic,
yes.
It would actually create more conflict.
Yes.
So I don't think that was necessarily a bad thing. I think I was being conflict averse before, and now I'm much more able to handle conflict and actually see that sometimes it's necessary, and that's just a way of finding a way of solving an issue or moving forward. But I think they, if I went back and talked to people at that time, sort of 215, 216, as I started to sleep better, I think there was definitely a shift. But however, for some people, probably not a positive shift.
Yes, absolutely. The other thing is that, of course, with sleep, that there are those cultural aspects. And again, that's something that I pick up with clients often, that because of expectations in whatever walk of life, we find ourselves to stay up late. Perhaps we're wining and dining, entertaining other companies and customers, or we're attending conferences, or whatever it might be. So we're eating late at night, not having that winding down routine. And there's a lot of pressure to conform to that norm, to go out and do, to be up late, drinking, etc. And also the 24/7 culture, which of course technology has made possible. And that idea as well, and particularly it's something quite strong in the oil industry, especially if you go to America, as my husband's been over a couple of times, to be, first one in the office in the morning and last one out at night. There's very much that culture as well, which is not a good thing. And he certainly didn't conform to that. But there are those who feel the pressure to fit in with that kind of cultural norm. And these kinds of things are not the best if you're trying to make lifestyle changes to benefit you.
I think the culture of presentism, which is sometimes what it's called, what you're talking about being first in and last out, is something that will be challenged by the COVID-19 situation, because many people who are used to going to an office early and coming home late are now working from home, and may in the future not return to working 5 days a week in an office. They might end up going in a couple of days a week for specific meetings or brainstorming or the opportunities to do some innovation work or something like that. But quite a lot of their work may well now be done outside the office. So then you have this whole thing that no one's going to see what you're doing. And I hope that we'll move to a more, especially for knowledge-based workers, we'll move to a more outcome-based approach than an activity-based approach when it comes to, or presentism-based approach when it comes to assessing people in terms of what they've done and what they haven't done. I certainly think that the leader sets the tone. And when I had my book launch last year, Beverley, someone asked me sort of what my dreams for the future were, if you like, around this topic. And I said, and it sort of, I'd not really thought about that question. And it kind of came to me because a lot of my focus is on working with individuals. And I kind of think, well, if I can help one person here or two people there with their sleep issues, then that's great. That's kind of it's been the limit of my aspiration. But I thought, if a FTSE 250 CEO, when he's been quizzed by the analysts every year for his annual results and annual report and so forth, explicitly says moving our culture of thousands of people to sleeping better has been one of the keys to our success, then that would be wonderful. And I really think that more and more senior leaders set the tone. If they say, no, look, guys, we need to be properly rested. So I don't want any emails from you over the weekend unless the place is falling down or someone's in danger physically. And I want you to knock off every night. I don't want anything after 7 o'clock on a Friday night or whatever the parameters happen to be. Then that would be very, very healthy. And I think those people in leadership roles would be surprised how much it would be appreciated and how things would improve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes absolute sense because it's going to make all of these people much more effective, much more productive as leaders, and surely that's what we should be aiming for. It's not about being seen. The culture of presentism is exactly right, that being seen to either be there in terms of being present or being there in terms of being on your email at 11:15 at night or midnight, striking up a conversation when you should be sleeping, or having a conversation with your nearest and dearest, not somebody across the channel or whatever, then these are things that surely should be part of our working life. So no, it's fantastic that you're trying to encourage that and trying to set that tone. Really, really impressed with that. But also another thing that came out in your book is the fact that there are some companies who are actually starting to make those changes. So would you like to say a little bit more about those companies?
Yeah, there's certainly been some changes made in both Germany and France, and the ones that are most probably well highlighted are in the German auto industry, and that's partly related to the strength of the white-collar unions in Germany. We're basically saying, people are being asked to work longer and longer and longer, and you're not paying them for it. Right. So actually certain German major sort of car manufacturers we'd all have heard of stop the server working at a certain time at night and it's reconnected, say, at 8 o'clock, 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, so that there is a physical break put on. So if people do want to sit on their laptops later on, well, they can't actually send the email till the following morning. So that I know has happened. I also have read about some quite unusual ideas, which were, and I'm talking here about vacation, but of course, taking a holiday and taking a break is then linked to resting and sleeping. That in the US, there is a software company that has developed a system which they believe they can track using IT solutions, where they say you can get a $7,500 bonus. It's quite a lot of money if A, you take your vacation, and B, you disconnect properly and don't work on your vacation. Now, I think their holidays, they tend to get slightly lower allowances than we do in terms of days, but even so, that'll be at least 2 or 3 weeks a year. And they've developed a system to do that. Conversely, there's, not conversely, but also, there's a Japanese company which is wonderfully called Crazy Incorporated. I don't know if there's any link between that and their sleeping habits, but it's based in Tokyo. And they developed a system of points to offer employees who sleep at least 6 hours a night, which are presumably in Japan is good going. Certainly I'd be encouraging more like 7.5 hours. But in Japan, if they can sleep 6 hours a night at least 5 days a week, they get points. They can exchange things at their company cafeteria, and those that sleep the best get at least an extra $600 a year or something like that to do so. So there are things that people are starting to do in different cultures using technology, especially to try to link it to very solid material financial reward. And I think that the calculation, I think it was the Rand Corporation, suggested that lack of sleep in Japan was costing the economy about 138 billion, and similar estimates in the US are over 400 billion when you take into account all the loss of productivity, the health, sickness, and other detrimental effects of loss of health. Now, when you look at numbers like that and you understand what's behind that, then clearly there is hard evidence that something as soft to most people as sleep really matters.
Yeah, absolutely. Sleep is a very serious topic, and we could speak for several weeks and months and still not touch the surface on sleep and the implications of it. But I'm delighted that these companies are starting to make these changes. And, you know, in a way, although it's positive, that there's something sad in hearing you explain some of those examples, like people being paid, that here's a bonus of money to go on holiday. And it seems awfully sad that people don't just do that. And I know that's much more a part of the American culture than it is of the UK culture. We're much more keen to go on holiday, but it's sad when we have to track people to know how to behave themselves. And it's something, another expression you use in the book actually a few times, is the fact that we need to learn to be humans being, not humans doing, because that one is one of my favourites that I'm always sharing with people as well. And you know, we've kind of lost our way, and there is a deep sadness in that, although I'm excited by it. But I wonder, I mean, of those you've talked to in the UK so far among CEOs, how receptive have they been to making some key changes, whether it's around people being stopped doing their emailing late at night or whatever it might be?
I haven't seen a great movement towards making a change at the moment. I would say the people that have written to me, say having read the book, or people I've come across in presentations I've done, it's more around individuals making a change themselves and then seeing how they can publicize it. So I think you're quite right, Beverley. I think without CEOs and leaders of businesses making behavioral shifts, nothing will happen. And I was delighted earlier this year when I was working with a group of CEOs. An example would be one who runs a business and said, you know, after your talk, Giles, the thing I'm going to most take away is I'm going to encourage my staff to have lunch breaks. I'm going to encourage them to take a proper break to do some exercise, go off and have a walk, talk to colleagues, whatever they want to do, but actually take a proper pause. And it's things like that that are the beginning of actually improving people's sleep, because you're actually starting to say, no, rest is important. It matters. You will be more productive after lunch if you've had an hour off, or if you let your food digest properly and actually have a pause. And that is, if you like, the beginning of a conversation then about, okay, what else do we need to do to be more productive at work, whether it be in terms of flexibility around working, which is, the conversation everyone's going to be having now. And this is very, very important as we go out of, hopefully go out of a COVID environment into a world where we've had that experience. We know it could happen again. Organizations are increasingly looking at continuing the flexible working policies that they've had in terms of working from home, and actually giving employees a little bit more empowerment as to how they want to organize themselves. I think there'll be a bunch of people that find that very easy, very engaging, and very inspiring, that they can set their own hours a bit more, that they aren't spending 2 hours a day commuting, that they can use that for exercise or being with a family, or even possibly sleeping a bit longer. There'll be another bunch of people that actually find that very difficult. They've always been almost organized by somebody else, and they've known that they had to get up, get dressed for work, and be there at a certain time, and be there till a certain time, and so forth. And I think this is where leaders will have a great role to play in the future, is helping those people as well who find that all quite difficult as to how to organize themselves better. Just as they'll also have to address all those other issues around, office space and people who haven't got, a separate room to have a study and all that sort of stuff. So there'll be quite a lot which will include looking at rest and sleep and just the rhythm of work and the rhythm of your life, which will be high on the agenda, I think, for CEOs going forward. And that plays back to your point about the human being and human doing thing. Otherwise, people could very easily spend all their time working if they're not careful, or just not be able to compartmentalize that and make proper time for all the other things they should be doing.
Absolutely. So I thought before we finish up, just go through some of the things that you did nutritionally. We talked about giving up caffeine, about increasing exercise, but just to say a little bit more about what you did nutritionally, what shifts you made that you felt were some game changers for you personally.
I think I've made and there's it's a bit of a list in the book of certain things. One thing I came to understand better, so it was a shift, but it wasn't something new for me, was the use of naps. And I write about it quite a lot in the book. And, NASA researched naps when they were sending up the first astronauts 50 years ago. And they came up with that wonderful definition that the ideal nap is 26 minutes. And I've always been fascinated by that, why it's not 25 or 27 minutes, but it's 26 minutes apparently, which essentially gives you, if you're like me and who can fall asleep very easily at most times of the day, if he wants to, you find you can nod off in about 4 minutes, and then you've got your sleep there, and you've got set the alarm for half an hour, and you're fine. And I know others who've said, although I wouldn't encourage this, but if you are still a coffee drinker, I've known people who said, if you have an espresso and then you lie down, within 30 minutes the espresso kicks in and wakes you up. So that's another way of doing it. Although, as I say, I'm not a great advocate of drinking espressos. But if that's already a habit you have, that's another thought. So the use of the strategic nap, use it sparingly, try and keep it to a certain length of time, and make sure you have the nap before 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It seems to affect your sleep less. Epsom salt baths are another thing that I often recommend to people. And that's partly because Epsom salts contain, partly because they're nice things to do, but also it contains magnesium, which is a very important factor in helping us sleep. For those that don't have a bath or find things like Epsom salts might irritate their skin, they can actually either take magnesium orally with tablets or use sprays and so forth. However, I'm sure you know, Beverley, all the research suggests that taking the magnesium in through your skin is the most effective way of using it. Disconnecting is very important in terms of habits, as you've already outlined, and a couple of other things that I have used. One thing I've just started using in the last few months, actually, is a weighted blanket. if you're either sleeping on your own or sleeping with a partner that also has a sleeping problem, you can find these weighted blankets that weigh about 9 kilograms, which maybe go on top of the duvet or instead of the duvet, depending on where you are or how you sleep. They are very effective at, what I find them most effective for is if you wake in the night, like many men over 50 or 60 need to go visit the bathroom, getting back to sleep straight after that. I think they really help me with that. So there was been quite a lot of literature about how and why they work. If you Google it, you'll see quite a lot around this. I certainly found the weighted blankets being quite a help to me, and I still use the mindfulness technique I outlined in the book quite early on, around body scanning, around just focusing on each part of the body and breathing and thanking, actually combined with a technique of just saying thank you to each part of the body as you scan up and down and so forth. I still use that if I really can't sleep, find that very helpful. And often if I get into a pattern of struggling with my sleep, it's as simple as just remembering that disconnect a bit earlier, have a nice cup of chamomile tea and read in bed for half an hour. And, getting back into that sort of those basic rhythms. I mean, there's a reason, I think, why we read, children have a bedtime rhythm. We're very focused on making sure, most of us as parents, that our kids, especially when they're younger, have that sort of bedtime rhythm that often involves a glass of something warm, like milk or so forth, that involves reading the story, etc. And I think that's no coincidence that works for most kids and that they really appreciate it. And somehow when we get to a certain age, we forget about that and forget that that's actually quite a good rhythm to go into. So this whole piece around trying to get up, go to bed at a similar time and get up at a fairly similar time, those sorts of rhythms really do help you sleep as well. So and I guess what we've done in this conversation is we've ended up listing quite a lot of different things that you can do. And that's very much, when I talk about the holistic approach, that's very much my philosophy is, here are things I've tried. Here are other things I know I haven't necessarily used quite as much myself, but others have tried. So here's a menu of things to go after. And you'd be well advised to choose one or two and try them, see if they're working. If they're not, try some others, but give one or two a chance for 30 days or something like that. And so what I've tried to do in the book is give people a menu to pick from.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you mentioned Epsom salts, because actually the subject of magnesium is an interesting one that we raise all the time, because it is something of an epidemic, magnesium deficiency these days, because of lack of that particular mineral in the soil, but also people not eating enough greens, enough avocados, etc., which are high in this particular mineral. But the other thing is that when we're stressed, the body uses up more of it than it normally would, so we become depleted. And
my understanding is we don't produce it ourselves, magnesium, do we? So we have to get it from outside sources. And as you say, if we're not eating enough broccoli or avocado or whatever, then we'll have to find some way to supplement it. And I certainly know from my coaching that recommending, most people have no concept of the importance of magnesium, and most people are magnesium deficient.
That's right. Yeah, it's a very common problem nowadays. And even if you are eating those things, you can still be deficient, because if you are stressed, because it's used for over 300 functions in the body, you quickly become depleted. And actually, we do absorb it very well through the skin, but we also lose it through the skin, which is another interesting aspect to this, because if you're going to the gym a lot and you're sweating, we lose magnesium through sweat. So if you're going to the gym after work at night and you're sweating and you're not putting that back because you're not having a magnesium bath when you come home, then you're adding to the problem and setting yourself up for a potential sleep problem. But early signs of deficiency can be, apart from sleep issues, of course, headaches, twitchy eyes, restless legs, anxiety, palpitations. All of these things can result from the lack of this important mineral. So it is something that we take very seriously, but at the same time, I like the fact that there is this holistic approach in the book, because, somebody could come to me and say, well, what have you got? What's the magic bullet for sleep? And we could send them off with magnesium as Epsom salts. We could give them it orally, and we do, and it's extremely effective. But if they're downing 7 or 8 espressos a day, and they're going home at night and they're eating just a plate of pasta, no protein, and then they're downing half a bottle of wine, the magnesium is going to do a lot less for them. We have to address the lifestyle factors as well as stress. And that's why, your book is good, because it explores all of those aspects as well. And that's what we try to address with clients.
So you've just described me about a decade ago, but mercifully not anymore.
Absolutely.
I've survived to tell the tale.
You have. You're an example to all. And an inspiration, definitely, through doing the book. So it's obviously meant to be. So thanks for giving those top tips. I mean, we will be delighted to obviously stock the book ourselves, and it is an easy read. It's not too long, not too complex, and easy for people to get through. I also like the fact that it's a nice hardback book with the little what's the word for
elastic?
Got the elastic there, which you could pop inside, because I was doing that. It's handy if you haven't got a bookmark. That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
So very convenient to have at your bedside because of that, actually, and to just dip in and out of at night with your chamomile tea after your Epsom salt bath, and really, really enjoy and hopefully find some words of wisdom there. And those of you who are at work, I hope that people will pass this on to their managers and their CEOs. Get a copy for your CEO, everybody, and let's have some big cultural change going on throughout the UK, inspired by Giles and his research and his honesty and frankness in this fabulous book. So thank you so much for taking part today and answering our questions and sharing some of your own experience and research on this fascinating topic which affects us all.
Thanks very much, Beverley. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you for joining the Nourishing Insights podcast. We do hope you've enjoyed it, and if you'd like to follow us, you will find us on Instagram, Facebook and YouTube. You will also find our website at nourishinginsights.com. Look forward to seeing you next time, and in the meantime, stay nourished and let food be your medicine.